Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Is it possible to reduce a nuclear weapons stockpile and still stay safe from a nuclear weapon attack? Are we more likely to be killed by small arms than we are a nuclear exchange? We'll be back in just a moment to talk about these and other hot button issues. Welcome back to our program. Today we're talking about a dual threat to people in the United States and around the world. The first threat is with the proliferation of nuclear weapons, but the second threat is with the use of small arms. My guest today is an expert in this area, and we're going to be focusing on what can be done to alleviate both of these threats. Ambassador Sergio Duarte is the High Representative for the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs. Ambassador Duarte, a Brazilian national, represented Brazil as ambassador to Nicaragua, China, Canada, Austria, and several other countries. Mr. Duarte has had a distinguished career as a diplomat and leader in the field of disarmament, arms control, and non-proliferation. Ambassador Sergio Duarte, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
I appreciate you being back. We did this about a year and a half ago, and I appreciate you coming back and talking about these very important topics. Let's start off with a very basic question. What exactly is the Office for Disarmament Affairs in the United Nations? What are the goals of your office? What do you do?
Well, the office exists already for a number of years, but recently when Secretary General Ban Ki-moon took office, he decided to re-energize the office and created the post of High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, which is the one that he appointed me to. And we have tried, of course, since then, since his coming to the UN, we have tried to revitalize the dialogue among member states and also the compliance and respect for the principles and the treaties that exist in this area worldwide, including, of course, many from the United Nations.
Exactly. Now, in your Office for Disarmament Affairs, you have 5 branches.
Yes.
Just briefly, what are the titles of those 5 branches?
Well, one deals with weapons of mass destruction. The other one deals with conventional weapons. There's also one that deals with regional disarmament. We have 3 centers for disarmament and peace in 3 different parts of the world. We have a center in Geneva that deals mainly with the Conference on Disarmament that has its seat there, and the organizations that have their seat in Geneva. And we also have a branch for outreach and information to the public.
Mm-hmm. Now, when we think of nuclear weapons, we think of these horrific weapons that can create so much devastation. If we just put them in comparison to what happened in World War II, let's think back to that horrific experience where over 60 million people died, Europe lay in ruins, parts of Asia had been destroyed. It was a tremendous suffering going on around the world. Yet during World War II, they used conventional weapons. They used weapons that would not begin to classify as nuclear. Today, of course, we had the 2 atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But talk a bit about how we should perceive nuclear weapons today in comparison to the devastation that took place in Europe and Asia, and that was horrible at that time. But in comparison, if we had an exchange of nuclear weapons today, it would be far more devastating than what we've had. We would have nuclear winter, we would have perhaps the elimination of the human race. But put that in perspective for us, if you could.
Well, it's very hard to put in perspective because the only example we have, or the only two examples we have, is the destruction in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and these were comparatively small nuclear weapons. One of those weapons, taken by one airplane, was sufficient to kill and destroy upwards of 200,000 people at the same stroke. You would need hundreds of carpet bombings from World War II to have the same effect, and not to speak of the radiation, lingering radiation, and the destruction of human beings continuously for decades after the strike. So I think it's very hard to compare. I think there is no comparison, and because of that, it is that nuclear weapons are so much different from any other types of weapons of mass destruction, like chemical weapons or biological weapons, in the way they destroy. And this is why their existence is today the main threat to mankind as a whole. And it's not only to countries specifically, but to mankind. I think we have to do something, and of course the international community has been trying to do something about that. The United Nations has been trying, of course, to do something about that. But we are only in the beginning, I would say, of our successes.
Well, there are some rays of hope that are out there right now, and of course you mentioned the United Nations a minute ago. We'll talk about that, and also talk about a recent meeting between the President of the United States and the President of the Russian Federation. But let's talk about what the UN is doing. I know Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has developed a 5-point proposal on how to deal with the nuclear proliferation, nuclear arms. What are some of those points, and what is your office doing to help move this discussion and to implement them?
Well, the first point of his proposal deals with the need for the countries, particularly those who possess nuclear weapons, to comply with their obligations. They have assumed obligations, particularly under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, to work towards a world free of nuclear weapons. And of course, those who possess those weapons are the ones that bear the most responsibility. But all countries that are parties to the Treaty on Non-Proliferation, and these are virtually all countries in the world, with 3 exceptions, they have an obligation to continue working to that. For a number of years, we had a sort of a stalemate in the main body in charge with those negotiations, which is the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva. And now, because of the change in attitude in some of the most important countries, the most important possessors of nuclear weapons, we have a ray of hope that things may move again. So the first, to come back to Secretary General's proposal, the first proposal had to do with the need to comply, to observe the obligations that countries have assumed under international treaties.
When you mentioned the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, that struck a chord immediately. I thought of Articles 4 and Article 6 of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Tell us what those articles are and what the countries who have signed on to this Non-Proliferation Treaty have agreed to do.
Well, besides Article 4 and 6, of course, you have Articles 1 and 2.
Yes.
Article 1 says that countries who possess nuclear weapons should not give those weapons away to anyone else, to proliferate in that way. And Article 2 says that countries that don't have nuclear weapons accept the obligation not to develop them. And these are very important articles. Now, Article 4, which you mentioned, is the one that enshrines the right to the peaceful uses of nuclear weapons, subject to the provisions of Article 2. So countries who do not possess nuclear weapons, they have a right to develop nuclear energy for peaceful purposes, as long as they do not proliferate nuclear weapons. And that is also a very important qualification. Article 6 is the one by which the possessors of nuclear weapons took the obligation to work towards nuclear disarmament, to enter into negotiations to achieve nuclear disarmament. But not only those who possess nuclear weapons are under that obligation. All parties to the NPT are called by the treaty to take part in negotiations. That is why many of them are members of the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva, where they are again reviving the negotiations towards having a world free of nuclear weapons.